Step into a frozen abyss, where the air itself hums with secrets older than time, and every shadow feels like a predator lying in wait. It was November 2022, and I was a man on the edge, a drifter with nothing but a plane ticket to the Pacific Northwest, a ticket I couldn't use for another 2 weeks. My life had crumbled. My pockets were as empty as my hope, and I had no one to turn to, no roof to shelter me. So I turned to the wilds of Minnesota, a place as unforgiving as my circumstances, and set up a frail, tattered tent among the towering pines of a forest that seemed to stretch into eternity. The wind howled through the branches, a haunting melody that sounded like the whispers of forgotten souls, mourning their lost existence. The cold was a living thing, a merciless beast that clawed at my skin, sinking its icy fangs deep into my bones. At night, the temperature dropped to a brutal 22 sextigo, a chill so profound it felt like the forest was trying to freeze my very soul. By day, it barely crept up to 35 or 38 degrees, offering no reprieve, only a mocking hint of warmth that never truly arrived. I kept a fire burning at all times, a desperate, flickering beacon of light in the endless dark. The flames danced weakly on the frozen ground, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. My dog, my only companion in this desolate place, stayed close, sometimes curling up beside me in the tent, his warmth a small comfort against the biting cold, and sometimes tied just outside, his soft whimpers echoing in the stillness as the night pressed in around us. We survived like this for 6 days, though each day felt like an eternity, a battle against the elements and the creeping dread that gnawed at the edges of my mind. Every tree in that forest seemed alive, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, their bark etched with patterns that looked too deliberate, too knowing. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, felt like a warning, a message from the wild that I was an intruder here, an unwelcome guest in a realm that did not forgive trespassers. I'd come from Memphis, a place where I'd hunted my first deer, a 10-point buck that had felt like a triumph at the time. But Minnesota was no Memphis. The air here was thick with an ancient presence, a weight that pressed down on my chest, making every breath feel like a struggle. It was as if the forest was alive, not just with the creatures that roamed its depths, but with something older, something darker, something that knew I was here and resented my presence. Have you ever stood in a place so wild, so untamed, that it felt like the land itself was whispering your name, telling you to leave while pulling you deeper into its embrace? I was a stranger in this frozen wilderness. A man out of place, and the forest knew it. It watched me, judged me, and waited for the moment I would break. Each day in that endless forest brought new encounters, each one more surreal than the last, as if the wilderness itself was testing me, peeling back the layers of my courage to see how much I could bear. I saw deer, massive, awe-inspiring creatures that moved through the trees like phantoms from a bygone era, their forms both beautiful and terrifying in their sheer power. Compared to the 10-point buck I'd taken down in Memphis, a hunt that had once filled me with pride, these Minnesota deer were giants, their antlers rising like jagged spires, scraping against the dim, filtered sunlight that barely penetrated the dense canopy above. They roamed about 100 yards away, their movements graceful yet deliberate, sometimes galloping along the nearby train tracks that cut through the forest like a scar. Their hooves pounded the earth, sending tremors through the frozen ground, a rhythmic pulse that I could feel in my chest, as if the forest itself was breathing, alive with their presence. Can you imagine standing in a wilderness so vast, watching creatures so grand they seem to belong to another world, their every step a reminder of your own fragility. Their size was staggering, their bodies rippling with muscle, their eyes glinting with a primal intelligence that made me feel small, insignificant, a mere speck in the grand tapestry of this untamed land. But the deer were not the only visitors to my lonely campsite. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and crimson, stray dogs would emerge from the shadows. Their presence as unsettling as the deer's was majestic. One, sometimes two, they'd appear with a ghostly stillness, their eyes catching the last fading light of day, glowing with a predatory calm that sent a shiver down my spine. They never made a sound, no barks, no growls, just a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. They'd step closer, their movements slow and deliberate, each paw placed with a precision that spoke of intent, of purpose. I'd shout, my voice echoing through the trees, raw and desperate, flailing my arms in a frantic attempt to drive them away. They'd retreat, slinking back into the underbrush, but their eyes never left me, those piercing gazes lingering like a promise, a warning that they'd be back, that they were waiting for the moment I'd let my guard down. What would you feel standing alone in the twilight, knowing something is watching, waiting, its silence more terrifying than any sound? Then one night the forest's quiet was shattered by a violent disturbance, a sound so jarring it tore me from the fragile safety of my tent. Stones tumbled along the train tracks, a chaotic clatter that echoed through the trees, as if something massive was moving, something unstoppable. I stepped out, my breath visible in the frigid air, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw them, 10 deer, their eyes wild with a frantic energy, charging down the tracks directly toward me. What would your body do if a herd of giants bore down on you, their intent unclear, their power undeniable, as if you were the sole target of their fury? The ground quaked beneath their thunderous leaps, each bound closing the distance between us, the lead pair coming within mere feet of where I stood. I braced myself, my mind racing with images of being trampled, crushed beneath their weight, my body broken on the frozen earth. But as I lunged toward the tent, my legs trembling with fear, they veered at a sharp angle, a perfect 90-degree turn that defied their momentum, and vanished into the darkness as if they'd never been. The air was thick with the scent of pine and fear, my pulse a deafening drum in my ears. Terror and wonder collided within me, a storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. This forest wasn't just wild, it was alive and it was hunting. Its creatures playing a game I didn't understand, a game where I was the prey, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. On the second night, as I knelt by the fire, coaxing the weak flames to life with trembling hands, a sensation colder than the frost around me slithered up my spine, wrapping around my heart like a vice. Have you ever felt the weight of unseen eyes? Their gaze so intense it feels like they're peeling away your skin, exposing your fear to the night. Beyond the train tracks, where the forest thickened into an impenetrable wall of shadow, 2 glowing points flickered in the distance, faint but steady, like the headlamps of hunters stalking through the night. On my first day here, a stranger had passed by, his voice gruff as he asked about deer hides. So I assumed it was him and his companion, out there in the dark, working on a fresh kill. I turned away, my breath shallow, trying to push the unease from my mind, to focus on the crackling fire and the warmth it offered. But sleep wouldn't come, not with that feeling gnawing at me, the sense that I was being watched, studied, hunted. I stepped outside, the cold biting at my exposed skin, and those glowing points were still there, unmoving, a few feet apart, locked in a strange, deliberate rhythm that felt wrong, unnatural. Imagine staring into a void so deep it feels alive, only to realize that void is staring back at you, copying your every breath, your every fear. I aimed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, but the light seemed to drown in the black, swallowed whole by the forest's endless hunger. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, straining against the oppressive night, I saw the truth. Those weren't headlamps. They were eyes, 2 pairs of them, glowing with a sinister light, hiding behind the twisted shapes of fallen logs and upright trees. They shifted, swayed, crouched low, then rose again as if caught in a macabre dance, a game of shadows designed to taunt me. I tilted my head to the side, a nervous habit, and they mirrored the motion perfectly, their movements synchronized, with mine in a way that made my stomach churn. I took a step back, my boots crunching on the frozen ground, and they edged forward, their eyes never leaving me, never blinking, their gaze a tangible weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Dread surged through me, a primal fear that clawed at my insides, urging me to run, to hide, to escape. I scrambled into my tent, my hands shaking as I zipped it shut, leaving a small gap to peer through, a desperate need to know if they were still there, still watching. Through that sliver of fabric I saw them, those glowing eyes, their movements growing more frantic the harder I stared, as if my fear was feeding them, giving them strength. I gripped my knife and flares, the cold metal a small comfort against the terror that gripped me. My dog trembling against my chest, his soft whimpers the only sound in the suffocating silence. What would you do, knowing something out there is watching you, studying you, refusing to look away, its intent as dark as the night itself? The hours stretched on, each second an eternity. My eyes locked on those glowing points through the gap in the tent. At 5 a.m., I dared another glance, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. They were still there, unyielding, relentless, their gaze boring into me like a predator sizing up its prey. But as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pale gray, they vanished, leaving no trace, no sign they'd ever been there. Not a footprint, not a broken twig. Nothing to prove I hadn't imagined it all. I told myself they were wolves, that their mimicry was just a trick of my exhausted mind. But deep down, I knew better. The way they moved, the way they mirrored me, it was too deliberate, too intelligent, too otherworldly. They weren't wolves. They weren't anything of this world. I'd found a good spot, one I'd worked hard to clear, a small patch of ground that felt like a fragile sanctuary in this hostile place. So I convinced myself to stay, at least one more night, trying to ignore the creeping dread, trying to tell myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting to shadows and exhaustion. But the forest knew I was lying to myself, and it was waiting. On the 3rd night, I thought the deer had returned, their familiar crashing sounds echoing from the train tracks, a chaotic rhythm that pulled me from the fragile safety of my tent. But what emerged from the darkness wasn't a herd. It was a single shadow, faster, stronger, its presence a tangible weight that pressed against my chest. Have you ever stood frozen? Every instinct in your body screaming that you're nothing but prey? That something ancient and merciless has marked you as its own? It tore through the tall grass, 40 feet away, its movement so swift, so predatory, that I could feel the air shift with its approach. Then in an instant it stood upright, towering over 7 feet, its silhouette etched against the starry sky, its pointed ears stretching skyward like the god Anubis, a harbinger of death from a world long forgotten. Its amber eyes blazed with an unearthly fire, a glow that seemed to pierce through me, pinning me in place, while its nose glistened with a wet sheen, reflecting the faint light of my flashlight. I stood frozen, my body refusing to move. My dog, whimpering inside the tent, his soft cries a desperate plea for safety we both knew wouldn't come. The flashlight in my hand was useless, its beam only intensifying the glow of those eyes, making them burn brighter, more menacing, as if mocking my feeble attempt to see what hunted me. Feel the dread of knowing escape is impossible, that you're trapped in the gaze of something not of this world, something that sees you as nothing more than a fleeting moment in its eternal hunt. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out the silence of the night, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I stared into those amber eyes, searching for a hint of mercy, of understanding, and finding none. I drew a deep breath, the cold air searing my lungs, and let out a scream, a raw, primal sound that tore from my throat, so alien I didn't recognize my own voice, as if my fear had taken form, a desperate cry to the universe to save me. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone, vanished into the night, leaving only the rustling grass to mark its retreat, a soft, whispering sound that seemed to mock my terror. I kept shouting, my voice hoarse, threatening to destroy it, to tear it apart, to make it pay for the fear it had instilled in me. But deep down, I knew it was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for the moment I'd let my guard down again. I crawled back into the tent, my hands shaking as I gripped my knife, the cold metal a small comfort against the overwhelming dread that consumed me. I didn't sleep that night, didn't dare close my eyes, my body tense, my ears straining for any sound that might signal its return. How do you face a hunter from another world, a creature that moves like a nightmare, its very existence a violation of everything you thought you knew? Morning came, a pale light filtering through the trees, and I fled to town, my hands trembling as I searched for images of Anubis on my phone. When I found them, those pointed ears staring back at me, tears fell silently down my cheeks, a quiet acknowledgement of the terror I'd faced, a terror I knew I'd never forget. Desperate to escape the nightmare that had consumed my nights, I relocated my tent half a mile deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thinner but denser. There, branches weaving a tighter cage around me, as if the wilderness itself was closing in. But have you ever fled one terror, only to feel its shadow trailing behind? Its presence a weight you can't shake, no matter how far you run. I hoped the new spot would offer some reprieve, a chance to reclaim the fragile peace I'd lost. But the forest had other plans. On the fourth night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, coyote cries pierced the air, their eerie wails sounding like human screams, a haunting chorus that stretched on for a full minute, each note a dagger of ice in my spine. Then came the wolves, their howls rising like a mournful dirge, their icy calls sending shivers across my skin, a primal reminder of my vulnerability in this untamed land. I piled more logs on the fire, the flames roaring higher, a desperate attempt to banish the shadows that seemed to grow darker, more oppressive with each passing moment. But the eyes returned, 2 pairs at first, their glowing gaze cutting through the night, then 6, then 8, standing motionless among the trees, their unblinking stares mirroring my every move, as if they were extensions of the forest itself, its sentinels tasked with watching me, judging me. Picture yourself opening your tent to dozens of glowing eyes, their light a cold, unfeeling judgment, as if the forest has claimed you as its own, a prisoner in its endless domain. Each night grew worse, the eyes multiplying, their presence a suffocating weight that pressed down on me, a silent promise that I'd never be free. On my final night, I could bear it no longer. I packed what I could carry, my hands shaking as I stuffed my belongings into my bag, leaving behind everything I couldn't take. abandoning the tent and the campsite to the mercy of the wild. I fled, my footsteps pounding against the frozen earth, my breath ragged, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest. Those nights still haunt me, their memory a shadow that lingers in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder of the terror I faced, the terror I survived. I've told no one, not a soul, fearing they'd think I'm mad, that they'd dismiss my story as the ravings of a broken man. What do you do when you've seen the unseeable, when you've felt the gaze of something ancient, something that doesn't belong in this world, and lived to carry its memory? It was 12 years ago, but the memory clings to me like a shroud, heavy and suffocating, as if the graveyard's air still lingers in my lungs. I was a woman in my late 20s, trapped in a job that sapped my spirit with every passing day. That evening, the weight of a disastrous workday pressed against my chest. A cruel boss, a project gone wrong, the sting of a colleague's betrayal. I couldn't face my apartment, with its pile of unwashed dishes, unanswered messages, and the oppressive silence that seemed to mock my loneliness. I needed to escape, to find a sliver of peace. My plan was to drive to a mountaintop lookout, indulge in a scoop of creamy mint chocolate ice cream, and let the city lights below soothe my frayed nerves. But somewhere along the way, a wrong turn twisted my path, leading me to a place I never intended to be. The iron gates of a sprawling graveyard loomed ahead, their shadows stretching like skeletal fingers across the road. The air grew heavy, as if the graves themselves were whispering my name, beckoning me into their embrace. I pulled over near the cemetery's edge, the hum of my car's engine fading into an unsettling stillness. The sky was a deep, bruised violet, the last traces of daylight clinging desperately to the horizon. This wasn't my first visit to this place. I'd walked its paths before, finding a strange solace in the quiet of its 50,000 graves. But tonight, the graveyard felt different, alive in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the berm separating the rows of headstones from the nearby neighborhood houses, and dialed my boyfriend, Mark. His voice came through the phone, warm and steady, a lifeline as I poured out the day's frustrations. I told him about the endless meetings, the harsh words from my boss, the betrayal that cut deeper than I'd expected. With each word I felt lighter, but the graveyard's shadows seemed to grow darker, pressing closer, as if they were feeding on my vulnerability. The headstones stretched endlessly to my left, their surfaces glowing faintly under the dying light, while the houses on my right stood silent, their windows like unblinking eyes watching my every move. I stayed on the sidewalk, avoiding the labyrinth of graves, knowing that darkness would soon erase the paths. My sneakers scraped against the concrete, a steady rhythm that grounded me as Mark's voice offered comfort. But then, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye froze my blood. About 50 meters into the graveyard, a shape, large, black, and impossibly dense, hovered among the tombstones. It was there for a fleeting moment, then gone like a stain wiped from reality. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat in my chest, but I forced myself to keep walking. Was it just my imagination? A trick of the fading light? I tightened my grip on the phone, my voice trembling as I told Mark I was fine, though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. My eyes darted to the graves, searching for any sign of the shape, while my mind raced with possibilities. I wasn't thinking of ghosts. Not yet. My fear was more grounded. A man lurking among the stones, his intentions as dark as the gathering, night. I was alone, a woman in a graveyard, and something was out there watching me. The unease coiled tighter, a cold knot in my stomach that refused to loosen. Mark's voice became a distant hum as my senses sharpened. Every rustle of leaves a potential threat, every shadow a lurking danger. I kept walking, my pace quickening, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, an invisible gaze boring into my back. Then it appeared again, and this time I couldn't look away. The shadow materialized just 40 meters away, forming as if the darkness itself had gathered into a towering mass. It was taller than any human, a shapeless void with no arms or legs, its edges pulsing with an unnatural energy. It glided through the gravestones, a silent specter, its form both opaque and translucent, distorting the stones behind it like a warped mirror. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat, as it moved for 4 agonizing seconds, each one an eternity. The shadow was darker than the night, heavier than the air, and it radiated a malice that made my skin crawl. It wasn't human, it wasn't alive, but it knew I was there, and it wanted me to know it too. My mind screamed, a silent plea for answers, but no logic could explain what I saw. What was it? Why me? The shadow's presence pressed against me, a psychic weight that whispered of ill intent, as if it could sense the cracks in my spirit and sought to widen them. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, dissolving into the air like mist under a harsh wind. My knees trembled, threatening to give way, as a single terrifying thought pierced the fog of my fear. If I see it again, it'll be right in front of me, its darkness swallowing me whole. Panic surged, a tidal wave that broke through my paralysis. I muttered a hurried goodbye to Mark, my voice barely a whisper, and turned toward my car, my legs shaking with every step. The sidewalk stretched endlessly before me, the graveyard silence now a deafening roar in my ears. Was it following me? Was it waiting in the shadows? I didn't dare look back, didn't dare tempt the darkness to pursue me further. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, until I reached my car and slammed the door shut, the metal a fragile shield against the night. The engine roared to life, a desperate cry as I sped away, the graveyard's gates shrinking in my rear view. Mirror. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The shadow's image burned into my mind, the way it moved, the way it watched, the certainty of its malevolence. I wasn't scared, not in the way I expected. It was something deeper, a primal dread that snapped me out of my dazed despair but left a new kind of terror in its place. Had it followed me? Was it still out there, waiting for another moment of weakness? When I got home, I poured out the story to Mark, my words tripping over each other in a rush to be free. He listened, his face a mask of skepticism, and shrugged it off. "You were emotional," he said. "You probably imagined it." His dismissal stung, a sharp blade against my raw nerves, making me feel small and irrational. Frustrated, I turned to my uncle, a man who'd always understood me. His eyes softened as I spoke, and he offered a theory that sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe your walls were down and something was drawn to that." His words echoed in my mind, a haunting truth I couldn't shake. I'd been vulnerable, my emotions a beacon in the dark, and something had found me. Had I invited that shadow into my world, my sadness a door it could slip through? The thought burrowed deep, fueling nightmares that lingered for years. Even now, 12 years later, I can close my eyes and see it. The towering void, its silent glide, the malevolence that radiated from its form. I've thought about seeking answers, perhaps from a psychic, but fear holds me back. What if they tell me it was real? What if it's still out there, waiting for me? The graveyard remains a forbidden place, its gates a boundary I'll never cross again. But the shadow's memory follows me, A dark companion that reminds me some things once seen can never be unseen. The forest called to me, a voice so soft it felt like a lover's plea, but it carried the weight of death. It was late summer 2020, and I was living in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, a place where the Berkshires, a sub-range of the northern Appalachians, stretched like ancient guardians across the horizon. I'd always heard the tales, the kind whispered in paranormal circles about the strange things that haunt these mountains. But I thought I was safe, far enough north to escape the southern Appalachian terrors. I was wrong, and that evening as the sun bled into the horizon, something in those woods decided I was its prey. My fiancé and I were driving through a wooded stretch, leaving our quiet suburb for a nearby city where groceries were cheaper. The journey took us 20 to 30 minutes, the first leg winding through a hilly area where the trees pressed close, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the dying light. It was around 6 or 7 p.m., the sky still bright but tinged with the golden hues of dusk. Visibility was poor, though. The lush green bushes and towering trees on both sides of the road swallowed everything in shadow. A few houses dotted one side, their lights flickering like distant stars, but the other side was a wall of foliage, impenetrable and foreboding. Have you ever driven through a place where the air feels too heavy, where every shadow seems to move just out of sight? The warmth of the day lingered, so we rolled the windows down, letting the breeze carry the scent of pine and earth into the car. We were climbing a hill, the road curving gently upward, when a sound cut through the hum of the engine. A long, resonant honk, deep and haunting, like a war horn forged from bone. Sensory overload. The sound vibrated through my chest, the air suddenly thick with the musk of damp leaves, the fading light casting jagged shadows across the dashboard, and my pulse quickened, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. My fiancé and I fell silent, our eyes meeting in a shared moment of recognition. We'd both grown up surrounded by woods, familiar with the calls of wildlife. Deer, especially males, could be loud, their cries echoing across valleys like a mournful bagpipe, sharp and animalistic. Yet this was different. It wasn't serene or natural. It was a sound that clawed at the edges of my sanity, a desperate wail that wobbled at the end, as if the creature were gasping its last breath. I pictured a deer, wounded and bleeding, its fragile body crumpled by the roadside. Nested storytelling. My grandfather once told me about a hunter in these hills who heard a deer cry like that, a sound so pitiful he couldn't resist following it. He never came back. His rifle was found weeks later, tangled in the roots of an ancient tree, but his body was gone. The woods take what they want, Grandpa had said, his voice low, his eyes distant. I'd dismissed it as a tall tale, but now as that haunting honk echoed through the trees, his story wrapped around me like a shroud. Feel the weight of that sound, the way it pulls at your heart, begging you to help, even as your instincts scream to stay away. The area was notorious for reckless drivers speeding through these narrow roads without a care. It wasn't hard to imagine someone hitting a deer and driving off, leaving it to suffer without calling for help. We scanned the road. No skid marks, no blood, no broken body. But the sound had been so real, so close, I couldn't ignore it. "Pull over," I said, my voice trembling with urgency. My fiancé hesitated, their brow furrowed, but they eased the car into a driveway, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. A homeowner's lights glowed softly in the distance, a faint promise of safety in this wild place. I stepped out, my boots sinking into the soft earth, and faced the foliage. I was a fool, a bleeding heart who couldn't bear the thought of an animal in pain, but I didn't know then that I was walking into a trap. Deer often hide themselves, and they're young in dense underbrush. So I started with the bushes on the side of the road near the houses. The foliage here was slightly less thick, broken by driveways, but still a tangled mess of green. I pushed aside branches, my hands shaking, and called out softly, "Come here, little one," as if coaxing a kitten. It felt silly. I'd never been up close with a deer before, and cats were my only reference. But the thought of a fawn, injured and alone, drove me forward. Trance loop. I called again, "Come here, come here, come here." My voice a desperate chant, as if the words could summon the creature into existence. But there was nothing. No movement, no eyes, just the oppressive silence of the forest. I crossed to the other side of the road, where the woods grew wilder, the trees taller, the shadows deeper. My eyesight isn't great, and the green blurred into a haze, but I kept searching, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. Then I heard it, a faint movement, so close it sent a jolt through me. My heart sank, heavy with the certainty that the deer was in agony, too weak to flee. It came from the first row of bushes, right at the edge of the road, a terrible hiding spot for a wounded animal. I moved downhill, my boots slipping on the loose dirt, and positioned myself at the crux of a blind turn in the road. Pattern interruption. Everything slowed, the world narrowing to that single spot. My breath shallow, my hands trembling as I parted the branches. I expected to see a fawn, its delicate form curled in the leaf litter, its eyes wide with fear, but there was nothing, just dirt, flat and lifeless, staring back at me. Embedded command. "Look closer," the forest seemed to whisper. "Don't move." I felt compelled to stay, my body rooted to the spot, as if the deer would appear if I just waited long enough. Anchoring. That moment, frozen in the hollow of the bush, anchored me in a trance I couldn't break, until the roar of an engine shattered the spell. A minivan came barreling around the blind turn, its speed reckless, its headlights blinding. Sensory overload. The screech of tires filled the air. The smell of burning rubber stung my nose, and the ground seemed to tilt beneath me. A wave of terror crashing over my senses. I threw myself backward, tumbling into the leaves, my back slamming against a tree as the van roared past, inches from where I'd stood. It didn't stop, didn't even slow, vanishing into the dusk as if I'd never been there. My fiancée shouted, my name, their voice raw with panic, and I stumbled to my feet, my hands scraped and bleeding, my chest heaving with ragged breaths. I crossed back to the driveway, my legs shaking, glancing around 1,000 times as if the forest itself might reach out to grab me. The homeowner stood outside, his face pale, asking if I was okay, but I barely heard him. We got back in the car, the silence between us heavy with unspoken fear. My fiancé knew something was wrong, something beyond the near miss with the van, but I couldn't speak. Not yet. We were still in those woods, and I feared saying it aloud would make it real. We drove off, the search for the deer abandoned, its cry never heard again. But as we left, I felt it. The pull I'd experienced, the hypnotic way I'd stared into that empty hollow, certain I'd find the fawn if I just stayed. There had never been a deer, and I knew it now. Nested storytelling. My cousin once told me about a hiker in these hills who heard a child crying, a sound so desperate he followed it to a cliff's edge. The cry stopped, and he felt a presence behind him watching. He survived, but he never went back. I'd laughed at the story, but now I understood. Something in the Berkshires had called me to that spot, luring me to the exact place where death waited in the form of a speeding van. Pattern interruption. I thought I was helping, but I was the prey, drawn into a trap I couldn't see. I don't know why it wanted me dead or why I escaped, but I know it was real. A force older than time dwelling in these mountains, hungry and cruel. This is my warning to you. The Appalachians, northern or southern, are not what they seem. They're older than bone, older than the stars, and something lives within them. Something that watches, waits, and hungers. Embedded command. Listen carefully. If you hear a cry in these woods, a call that tugs at your soul, turn back. It's not a deer, not a child, not anything you can save. It's a trap, and it wants you. I survived, but I'll never forget the whisper of the Berkshires, calling me to my doom. I was just a kid, maybe 12, living in a cramped apartment in northern Florida with my dad and sister. We'd been there nearly 3 years, long enough for the place to feel like home, but never safe. The air in that apartment was heavy, like it held secrets it didn't want to share. Strange things happened. Footsteps echoing in empty hallways, soft knocks on walls at midnight, voices murmuring when no one was around. I brushed it off, blaming the neighbors upstairs, their lives, bleeding through the thin walls. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The darkness in that place wasn't just shadows. It was watching. I hated sleeping alone. The dark wasn't just absence of light. It was a presence, thick and suffocating, like it could reach out and grab me. To cope, I'd hide under my blankets, my DS glowing faintly, its tiny screen a shield, against the night. That night I was deep in a game, the world reduced to pixelated battles, when Dad stormed in. "Enough," he said, snatching the DS from my hands. His voice was tired, not angry, but it stung all the same. He unplugged the nightlight from the hallway and set it up in my room, one of those projectors that splashed stars and planets across the ceiling. "Sleep," he commanded, flicking off the main light. The room transformed, bathed in a soft cosmic glow, Jupiter swirling, constellations twinkling. It should have been comforting, a child's dreamscape. But I lay there, wide awake, heart thudding, staring at the stars that felt too close, too ill. Then it happened. The room plunged into darkness, a void so complete it swallowed every speck of light. Not a flicker, not a glow, just black. My breath caught, trapped in my throat. It lasted maybe a second, but it felt like forever, like the world had stopped. Then, just as suddenly, the stars blinked back to life. I blinked, disoriented, my eyes locked on the ceiling. That's when I saw it. A shadow, sharp and deliberate, stretching across the projector's beam. It was a hand, not a vague shape, but a man's hand, fingers splayed, hovering over the light. Slowly, agonizingly, it curled inward, each finger bending with purpose, forming a fist. The wrist twisted, retreating into the darkness, as if pulling back into some unseen void. My body froze, every muscle locked. Was that real? My mind screamed it couldn't be, but my eyes, they'd seen it. The stars shone on, innocent, as if nothing had happened. I sat up, clutching my blanket, my gaze darting around the room. The corners were too dark, the shadows too deep. I wanted to call for Dad, but my voice wouldn't come. "Just breathe," I told myself. "You're imagining things." But the air felt wrong, charged like the moment before a storm. A minute passed, maybe 2. My heart hammering so loud I thought it'd wake the house. Then something moved. A black mass, shapeless yet solid, darted across the ceiling. It swept over the projector's light, blotting out the stars for a heartbeat, before vanishing. The glow returned, serene, mocking my terror. I pressed myself against the headboard, blanket pulled to my chin, eyes wide. What was that? My mind raced. conjuring images of ghosts, demons, things I didn't believe in. But I'd seen it. I knew I had. Stay still, I thought, it'll go away. But the room didn't feel empty anymore. It was alive, watching, waiting. Minutes dragged on, each second stretching into eternity. I stared at the ceiling, afraid to blink, afraid to move. Then it came. 2 violent jolts shook the wall beside my head like fists slamming into the plaster. The headboard rattled, vibrating against my back. The force was raw, angry, undeniable. My scream lodged in my throat as I scrambled out of bed, bare feet hitting the cold floor. I didn't think, didn't look back, just ran. The hallway blurred past, my sister's door a beacon. I dove into her room, burrowing under her blanket, my body shaking. "Don't ask," I whispered when she stirred. I stayed there, curled up until dawn broke, the first light chasing away the night's grip. Morning came, gray and heavy. I crept back to my room, dreading what I'd find. The stars were gone, the projector silent, but the painting above my bed, a bright landscape Dad had hung to cheer me up, was wrong. It tilted sharply, one corner jutting out, the nails half pulled from the wall. Whatever hit that wall wasn't human. The realization sank into my bones, cold and final. I didn't sleep in my room for 2 weeks, bunking with my sister, her presence a fragile shield. Even then I kept a lamp on, its harsh light a defiance against the dark. That night changed me. I'd always sensed something off in that apartment, but now I knew. It wasn't just a place. It was alive, haunted by something older, angrier than us. Years later, I can't shake it. The apartment's grip lingered, growing worse through my teens. Footsteps became louder, knocks more insistent, voices clearer in empty rooms. Florida itself felt cursed, its swamps hiding things that didn't belong in the light. That night under the stars, something found me. It wasn't just a shadow or a sound. It was a presence, deliberate, watching. I don't know what it wanted, but I feel it still in the quiet moments in the dark. Some places don't let you go. In the dead of an Oklahoma night in 1985, I drove straight into the jaws of despair. The highway, an endless tunnel of darkness swallowing my broken soul. I was 22, a man shattered by a divorce that had left me hollow. My life a pile of ash I couldn't escape. The dashboard clock glowed a sickly green, its hands pointing past midnight, each tick a reminder of the emptiness I carried. Feel that void now, the kind that clings to your bones, whispering that there's no way out. I'd left Texas behind, fleeing the wreckage of my marriage, my faith, my everything, with no destination but the open road. The hum of the engine was my only companion, a droning lullaby for a man who'd forgotten how to dream. The air inside my car was heavy, thick with the scent of old leather and the bitter tang of my own exhaustion. I hadn't eaten in days, hadn't slept without, nightmares clawing at my mind. My hands trembled on the wheel, my eyes burning from staring into the endless black of Interstate 40. Picture it, a lone car cutting through a moonless night, the world outside a void where hope goes to die. I pulled into a rest stop in eastern Oklahoma, the kind of place that felt forgotten by time itself. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. I stumbled into the restroom, the cold water I splashed on my face doing little to wash away the despair etched into my reflection. As I climbed back into my car, my gaze caught a figure standing on the ramp. A man, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of distant headlights. He wore a rain slicker that shimmered like oil in the darkness, an ivy cap pulled low over his face, looking like he'd stepped out of a forgotten era. He reminded me of the gyro captain from Road Warrior, a ghost from a story I thought I'd left behind. I didn't stop. I couldn't. My foot pressed the gas and he vanished into the night. But some encounters refuse to let you go. Less than an hour later, my body betrayed me, forcing another stop at a gas station further down the highway. The night had grown heavier, the clouds above swirling with an unnatural weight, as if they were watching me. The station was a lonely outpost, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. The air thick with the scent of gasoline and something I couldn't name. Something ancient, something alive. As I merged back onto the ramp, my headlights swept across the darkness and my heart stopped. There he was again. The same man, same slicker, same cap, standing as if he'd been waiting for me all along. How could he be here? I'd driven miles, far too many for any man to cover on foot. Feel that icy dread now, the kind that grips your chest when reality bends in ways it shouldn't. My mind screamed to keep driving, to escape whatever this was. But something deeper, a pull I couldn't explain, made me slow down. My hands shook as I pulled over, the car door creaking like a warning as he climbed in. "Thanks for the lift," he said, his voice a low, steady hum that seemed to echo inside my skull, as if it came from everywhere and nowhere. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic thud of tires against asphalt. I stole glances at him, his face half hidden in shadow, his presence filling the car with a weight that pressed against my chest. Then he spoke, and it was as if he'd reached into the deepest parts of me, pulling out the pain I'd buried. He knew things no stranger should. He spoke of heartbreak, of the kind of loss that leaves you gasping for air, his words weaving through my thoughts like a thread stitching up a wound. Listen to his voice now. Let it draw you in. Let it hold you. He turned to God, to blessings, waiting beyond the darkness, his words a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. I'd abandoned my faith long ago, raised Christian but living far from it. Yet his voice stirred something in me, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Imagine a stranger who sees every crack in your soul, who promises you'll rise again. In the dim glow of the dashboard, I saw his eyes, and for a moment they seemed to shimmer, not with light but with a depth that stretched beyond time, beyond the world I knew. Was he real, or had I conjured him from my own desperation? The miles slipped away, and by the time we approached Little Rock, Arkansas, I felt different, lighter, as if the chains of despair had begun to unravel. But the truth was waiting to reveal itself. At a convenience store, he asked for money for food. I hesitated, my mistrust of strangers warring with the strange bond I felt. I refused to give cash, fearing he'd waste it on vices, but offered to buy him something instead. See the scene unfold, a quiet store bathed in pale light, the clerk's tired eyes watching me, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and something unplaceable. I bought a pack of bologna, a half-gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and a candy bar. Simple provisions that felt like a sacred offering in that moment. I handed him the bag outside, my voice soft as I thanked him for reasons I couldn't fully grasp. He smiled, a smile that seemed to hold the weight of eternity, and walked toward the rear of my car, his steps silent on the pavement. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced in the rearview mirror. He was gone. My breath caught in my throat. No one disappears that fast. I stepped out, my heart pounding, and searched the lot, around the car, behind the only other vehicle, even in the shadows of the street beyond. Nothing. The bag, the milk, everything I'd given him had vanished, as if it had never been. I asked the clerk, who swore he'd seen no one but me, his voice tinged with confusion. I walked the perimeter, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. He wasn't human. The night closed in, heavy with a truth I couldn't deny, and I drove to a motel, my thoughts a storm of fear and wonder. That night I slept, a deep, peaceful sleep, the first in weeks, unmarred by the nightmares that had plagued me. When I woke, the darkness that had consumed me was gone, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. Feel that shift now. The moment despair gives way to light. I continued my journey, eventually finding a new life in Florida, where I met a woman who became my wife for 34 years. We faced hardships, but the good far outweighed the bad. A life I never thought I'd have. And yet I can't forget him. That hitchhiker, that stranger, was no ordinary man. I believe he was an angel, sent to pull me from the brink. Hebrews 13:2 echoes in my mind. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels unaware. I don't expect you to believe me, but I know what I felt, what I saw, and every time I drive a lonely road at night, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting to save another lost soul. Close your eyes and imagine a midnight so still, so silent, that the air itself feels heavy with secrets, until a sound tears through the darkness, a cry so haunting, it feels as though the night itself is weeping in anguish. It was just past, the stroke of midnight, when the phone rang, its shrill tones slicing through the quiet of our mountain home like a blade through silk. My mother-in-law's voice trembled on the other end, each word laced with a fear I'd never heard from her before. She lives at the far end of our adjoined 1-acre plot, a sprawling piece of land nestled at the base of the mountains, where the forest looms like a sentinel, its ancient trees whispering secrets in the wind. She told my wife she'd heard a sound, a chilling, otherworldly wail that echoed from beyond the tree line behind their house. A sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself, carrying a weight of sorrow and desperation. My wife's face paled as she relayed the message, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and dread, and she tugged at my arm, pulling me toward the window that overlooked the shadowed expanse of our property. We stood there, the cold glass pressing against my fingertips, the night outside a canvas of inky black, broken only by the faint outline of the trees. For 10 long, agonizing minutes we listened, our breaths shallow, our hearts pounding in unison as a feminine wail rose from the woods, a sound so sharp, so prolonged, that it felt like a dagger of ice piercing my chest. It was too human to be the cry of a fox or coyote, yet too wild, too raw to belong to any person I could imagine. Have you ever heard a cry so unnatural, so steeped in torment, that it makes your blood run cold, whispering truths of a world you were never meant to know? I'd spent hours afterwards scouring every resource I could find, searching for an animal in our region that could produce such a haunting call. But nothing matched, not the sharp yips of a fox, not the mournful howls of a coyote, nothing. The sound lingered in my mind, a ghostly echo that refused to fade, its eerie cadence replaying over and over like a song from some forgotten realm. Desperate to capture it, to prove it wasn't just a trick of my exhausted mind, I'd fumbled with my phone, my fingers clumsy in the dark, trying to record the wail as it reverberated through the night. But the moment I pressed the button, the sound stopped, as if the forest itself had sensed my intent and silenced its voice, leaving behind an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the wail itself. I played the recording back later, hoping to catch even a fragment of that haunting cry. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of the night and my mother-in-law's shaky voice, recounting what she'd seen. The absence of the sound only deepened the mystery, wrapping it in a shroud of unease that clung to me like a second skin, a reminder that whatever had made that wail was still out there, hidden in the shadows of the woods. In the recording, my mother-in-law's voice quivered with a fear that seemed to seep through the static, her words painting a vivid picture of her first, tentative steps into the unknown. She'd flipped on the back porch light, its pale yellowish glow spilling out into the night, casting long, jagged shadows across the frost-kissed grass of the yard. The air was biting, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and refuses to let go. But she stepped outside anyway, driven by a mix of curiosity and concern. She owns 2 German shepherds, fierce and loyal protectors who bark at the slightest disturbance. A rustling leaf, a passing squirrel, the distant hoot of an owl. They spend most of their days lounging in the yard, their ears pricked, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger, ever vigilant in their duty to guard the family. But that night, they were unnervingly silent, their massive forms huddled close to the house, refusing to follow her into the darkness. Their eyes, usually bright with alertness, were fixed on the tree line beyond the yard, wide and unblinking, as if they sensed something she couldn't, something that made even these brave guardians tremble with an unspoken fear. Can you imagine the dread that washes over you when even your fiercest protectors cower, their silence a deafening warning of what lies beyond the light? She stood there for a moment, her breath visible in the frigid air, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the darkness for the source of the wail. Then, in a burst of resolve, she clapped her hands, the sharp echoing sound cutting through the stillness like a gunshot, hoping to scare off whatever lurked in the shadows. The noise reverberated, bouncing off the trees, but the wail didn't return, and for a fleeting moment she thought perhaps she'd succeeded. Then she saw it, a small gray cat, no larger than a domestic pet, emerging from the gloom like a phantom. Its fur was the color of storm clouds, its eyes glinting faintly in the porch light, reflecting a cold, silvery glow that sent a shiver down her spine. It padded forward with a deliberate grace, moving to the far side of the creek that separated the yard from the woods, its movements slow and purposeful, as if it knew exactly where it was going. It paused there, turning its head to look back at her, its gaze steady, almost beckoning, as if urging her to follow. Then, just as quickly, it turned and vanished back into the forest, the darkness swallowing it whole, leaving behind an emptiness that felt heavier than its presence. What would you do, standing on the edge of the known, when a creature of the night calls you into its domain? Its silent plea, a lure you can't ignore. She stood frozen, the weight of that moment pressing down on her, the forest looming before her like a gateway to a world she wasn't sure she wanted to enter. My mother-in-law felt a pull, an unshakable, almost magnetic sensation that the gray cat was leading her somewhere, its fleeting presence a silent, desperate plea that tugged at her heartstrings. Have you ever felt a call so profound, so undeniable, that it overrides every ounce of fear, urging you to step into the unknown, even when every instinct screams to turn back? As an animal lover, much like my wife, her mind raced with images of a creature in distress, a wounded deer, a trapped fox, perhaps even a lost kitten, hidden deep within the woods, waiting for someone to rescue it, to ease its suffering. The thought of an innocent being, alone and in pain, stirred a protective instinct within her, a need to act that was as fierce as it was tender. She could almost picture it, a scene straight out of one of those heartfelt videos she loved, where a kind soul braves the elements to save a helpless animal, nursing it back to health with gentle hands and a warm heart. But her mind, sharp despite her empathy, held her back, whispering warnings of the dangers that lurked in the forest at night. The unseen predators, the treacherous terrain, the chilling possibility of something far worse than a wounded animal waiting in the shadows. The darkness beyond the tree line was vast, an endless expanse of black that seemed to swallow the light, and the risks were too real, too immediate to ignore. She called us, her voice a tangled mix of determination and dread, each word heavy, with the weight of what she'd experienced. She explained the cat's strange behavior, how its gaze had felt like an invitation, a summons into the woods, and how her worry for a suffering creature had nearly driven her to follow. But she admitted she was afraid to go alone. The forest too foreboding, its secrets too dark to face without help. She asked if I'd come, her request simple yet laden with urgency, and if I'd bring a gun to protect us from whatever might be waiting out there. Perhaps a coyote, its eyes glinting with hunger, or perhaps something far worse, something that didn't belong in the natural order of things. The mention of the woods, her fear, and the need for a weapon snapped me to attention, my pulse quickening as I realized the gravity of her words. What would you do, hearing a plea for help in the dead of night, knowing that answering it means stepping into a darkness that might not let you go? I could feel the weight of her request settling on my shoulders, a mix of duty and dread, as I began to prepare for what lay ahead. The forest waiting just beyond our doorstep, its mysteries whispering in the wind. I armed myself with a grim determination, the weight of my gear a tangible reminder of the unknown we were about to face. I grabbed my plate carrier, its heavy fabric a reassuring armor against the night, and strapped on a pair of knives, their cold steel a silent promise of protection. My pistol went into its holster, a familiar weight at my side, while I slung a shotgun over my shoulder, its barrel gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I clipped on my Milwaukee chest-mounted bar light, its beam a lifeline in the darkness, a piercing ray that could cut through the shadows and reveal what hid within. Small hand torch completed my arsenal, its flickering light a fragile hope in the face of the forest's vast, unyielding black. My mother-in-law met my wife and me in our backyard, her face pale in the silvery glow of the moon, her eyes darting toward the tree line as if she could still see the gray cat's ghostly form. I instructed them to drive along the narrow road that flanked the right side of our property, positioning the car so its headlights would cast a wide, glowing arc into the woods, a beacon to guide me back from the abyss. I'd approach from the rear of their property, a stealthy path that would avoid waking my father-in-law or startling the dogs, who still huddled near the house, their silence a haunting echo of the night's strangeness. What would you feel, stepping into a forest at night, knowing something unnatural waits within, its presence a shadow that clings to your every step? The left side of the property was bordered by a long, weathered fence, stretching 2 acres deep into the woods, a barrier that separated us from our neighbors, its wooden slats worn by time and the elements. The right side flanked a quiet road, leading to a handful of distant houses, their lights faint pinpricks in the night, too far to offer comfort. I crossed a small bridge over the stream that marked the boundary between the yard and the woods, the water's gentle gurgle a deceptive calm, its surface reflecting the pale moonlight in shimmering fragments. I angled toward the fence line, my boots crunching softly on the frost-covered ground, each step a deliberate move into the unknown. As I entered the woods, the air grew colder, heavier, as if the forest itself was breathing, its exhale a chilling whisper that brushed against my skin. A reflective glint caught my eye, a sudden flash in the darkness that made my heart skip, a beat. I aimed my hand torch, expecting a piece of debris, a forgotten can, a shard of glass. but instead found a small gray ovular shape, its surface covered in fur, its form unmistakably alive. A raccoon, I thought, its eyes glinting in the torchlight, its body curled near the fence as if seeking shelter from the night. I let out a shaky breath, my nerves fraying at the edges, but before I could turn away, I panned my light 10 feet to the right and froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. A pair of eyes stared back at me, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, belonging to a creature larger than any coyote I'd ever seen. Its gray fur shimmered faintly in the beam, its form a chilling blend of canine and feline traits, leaning more toward a dog, yet defying every rule of nature I knew. Its body was sleek, its movements deliberate, and as it met my gaze, I felt a shiver run down my spine. A primal fear that whispered of things that shouldn't exist, things that belong to a world beyond our own. Can you fathom the terror of facing something that defies nature? Its very existence a challenge to everything you thought was real. Its eyes locking onto yours with a purpose you can't comprehend. The creature held my gaze for a moment that stretched into eternity, its eyes unblinking, glowing with a light that seemed to pierce through me, seeing into the depths of my soul. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that belied its size, it turned and began walking deeper into the woods, its movements fluid, almost hypnotic, as if it knew I'd follow. Have you ever felt a pull so inexplicable, so overpowering, that it drowns out your fear, drawing you toward the unknown with a force you can't resist? Unlike any coyote or fox I'd ever encountered, which would have fled at the first whiff of my scent or the sound of my footsteps, this being showed no fear, no hesitation. It coexisted calmly near the raccoon I'd spotted earlier, the two creatures sharing the space with an eerie tranquility, as if they were part of the same unnatural tapestry, woven from threads of a world beyond my understanding. I followed, my chest light flooding the path ahead, its harsh beam cutting through the darkness like a blade, illuminating the gnarled roots and frost-covered underbrush that seemed to twist and writhe in the shadows. An eerie calm washed over me, a strange serenity that felt foreign, unnatural, as if the forest itself was lulling me into a trance, whispering promises of answers just beyond the next tree. I ventured 100 feet deeper into the woods, the creature, unmoving ahead, its silhouette a dark, imposing shape against the starry sky. It stood atop a hill, just over the crest near my neighbor's house, its eyes still fixed on me, unwavering, as if it had always known I'd come. I kept walking, my boots sinking into the frozen earth, the air growing colder with each step, until I heard a faint crunching behind me, footsteps soft but deliberate, echoing from the base of the woods. I glanced back, my heart skipping a beat, and saw the bobbing lights of flashlights, my wife and mother-in-law, their faces pale in the dim glow, their expressions a mirror of my own unease. I turned back to the creature, but its eyes were gone, vanished beyond the crest of the hill, as if it had never been there at all. I kept walking, my mind racing, until I realized I must have crossed our property line, a boundary marked by a line of small red flags where we'd installed an electric fence the previous summer. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly, and called my wife, asking where the line ended. Her voice was tight, her words clipped as she described the flags, but I couldn't see them, the darkness too thick, the woods too dense. Keeping my eyes toward the hill, I started walking backward toward our property, my chest light casting wild shadows, until I'd gone another 100 feet and finally spotted the flags, their red fabric a faint smear in the gloom. I turned and made my way back down the hill, my legs heavy, my breath ragged, and met my wife and mother-in-law at the base of the woods. showing them where I'd seen the raccoon and the creature, my voice low, my words tinged with a fear I couldn't shake. We made our way back down the yard, the grass crunching beneath our feet, and had just reached the porch when the wail returned. A sound so deep, so resonant, that it felt like the earth itself was groaning in agony. It was similar to the cry we'd heard before, but its pitch was lower, more guttural, and it came from the direction of the creature I'd followed, a haunting echo that sent a chill racing down my spine. What would you do, hearing a sound that defies the laws of nature, knowing you've chased something beyond comprehension? Its cry a reminder of the abyss you've brushed against. From the moment I'd pressed record to the moment I left those woods, not a single sound had escaped the forest. No rustle of leaves, no snap of twigs, just an oppressive silence that felt alive, watching, waiting. The whole time I'd felt no fear, just an urge to follow. A pure, unfiltered curiosity that drove me deeper into the unknown. But now, reflecting on it, nausea grips me, a sickening wave that rises in my throat. The memory of that night, a heavy weight on my chest. An enigma I can't unravel, a mystery that refuses to let me go. It was 12 years ago, but the memory clings to me like a shroud, heavy and suffocating, as if the graveyard's air still lingers in my lungs. I was a woman in my late 20s, trapped in a job that sapped my spirit with every passing day. That evening, the weight of a disastrous workday pressed against my chest. A cruel boss, a project gone wrong, the sting of a colleague's betrayal. I couldn't face my apartment, with its pile of unwashed dishes, unanswered messages, and the oppressive silence that seemed to mock my loneliness. I needed to escape, to find a sliver of peace. My plan was to drive to a mountaintop lookout, indulge in a scoop of creamy mint chocolate ice cream, and let the city lights below soothe my frayed nerves. But somewhere along the way, a wrong turn twisted my path, leading me to a place I never intended to be. The iron gates of a sprawling graveyard loomed ahead, their shadows stretching like skeletal fingers across the road. The air grew heavy, as if the graves themselves were whispering my name, beckoning me into their embrace. I pulled over near the cemetery's edge, the hum of my car's engine fading into an unsettling stillness. The sky was a deep, bruised violet, the last traces of daylight clinging desperately to the horizon. This wasn't my first visit to this place. I'd walked its paths before, finding a strange solace in the quiet of its 50,000 graves. But tonight, the graveyard felt different, alive in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the berm separating the rows of headstones from the nearby neighborhood houses, and dialed my boyfriend, Mark. His voice came through the phone, warm and steady, a lifeline as I poured out the day's frustrations. I told him about the endless meetings, the harsh words from my boss, the betrayal that cut deeper than I'd expected. With each word, I felt lighter. But the graveyard's shadows seemed to grow darker, pressing closer, as if they were feeding on my vulnerability. The headstones stretched endlessly to my left, their surfaces glowing faintly under the dying light, while the houses on my right stood silent, their windows like unblinking eyes watching my every move. I stayed on the sidewalk, avoiding the labyrinth of graves, knowing that darkness would soon erase the paths. My sneakers scraped against the concrete, a steady rhythm that grounded me as Mark's voice offered comfort. But then, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye froze my blood. About 50 meters into the graveyard, a shape, large, black, and impossibly dense, hovered among the tombstones. It was there for a fleeting moment, then gone like a stain wiped from reality. My heart pounded, A frantic drumbeat in my chest, but I forced myself to keep walking. Was it just my imagination? A trick of the fading light? I tightened my grip on the phone, my voice trembling as I told Mark I was fine. Though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue, my eyes darted to the graves, searching for any sign of the shape, while my mind raced with possibilities. I wasn't thinking of ghosts. Not yet. My fear was more grounded. A man lurking among the stones. His intentions as dark as the gathering. I was alone. A woman in a graveyard, and something was out there watching me. The unease coiled tighter. A cold knot in my stomach that refused to loosen. Mark's voice became a distant hum as my senses sharpened. Every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Every shadow a lurking danger. I kept walking, my pace quickening, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, an invisible gaze boring into my back. Then it appeared again, and this time I couldn't look away. The shadow materialized just 40 meters away, forming as if the darkness itself had gathered into a towering mass. It was taller than any human, a shapeless void with no arms or legs, its edges pulsing with an unnatural energy. It glided through the gravestones, a silent specter, its form both opaque and translucent, distorting the stones behind it like a warped mirror. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat, as it moved for 4 agonizing seconds, each one an eternity. The shadow was darker than the night, heavier than the air, and it radiated a malice that made my skin crawl. It wasn't human, it wasn't alive, but it knew I was there, and it wanted me to know it too. My mind screamed, a silent plea for answers, but no logic could explain what I saw. What was it? Why me? The shadow's presence pressed against me, a psychic weight that whispered of ill intent, as if it could sense the cracks in my spirit and sought to widen them. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, dissolving into the air like mist under a harsh wind. My knees trembled, threatening to give way, as a single terrifying thought pierced the fog of my fear. If I see it again, it'll be right in front of me, its darkness swallowing me whole. Panic surged, a tidal wave that broke through my paralysis. I muttered a hurried goodbye to Mark, my voice barely a whisper, and turned toward my car, my legs shaking with every step. The sidewalk stretched endlessly before me, the graveyard silence now a deafening roar in my ears. Was it following me? Was it waiting in the shadows? I didn't dare look back, didn't dare tempt the darkness to pursue me further. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, until I reached my car and slammed the door shut, the metal a fragile shield against the night. The engine roared to life, a desperate cry as I sped away, the graveyard's gates shrinking in my rear view mirror. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The shadow's image burned into my mind, the way it moved, the way it watched, the certainty of its malevolence. I wasn't scared, not in the way I expected. It was something deeper, a primal dread, that snapped me out of my dazed despair, but left a new kind of terror in its place. Had it followed me? Was it still out there, waiting for another moment of weakness? When I got home, I poured out the story to Mark, my words tripping over each other in a rush to be free. He listened, his face a mask of skepticism, and shrugged off. "You were emotional," he said. "You probably imagined it." His dismissal stung, a sharp blade against my raw nerves, making me feel small and irrational. Frustrated, I turned to my uncle, a man who'd always understood me. His eyes softened as I spoke, and he offered a theory that sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe your walls were down, and something was drawn to that." His words echoed in my mind, a haunting truth I couldn't shake. I'd been vulnerable, my emotions a beacon in the dark, and something had found me. Had I invited that shadow into my world? My sadness a door it could slip through. The thought burrowed deep, fueling nightmares that lingered for years. Even now, 12 years later, I can close my eyes and see it. The towering void, its silent glide, the malevolence that radiated from its form. I've thought about seeking answers, perhaps from a psychic, but fear holds me back. What if they tell me it was real? What if it's still out there waiting for me? The graveyard remains a forbidden place, its gates a boundary I'll never cross again. But the shadow's memory follows me, a dark companion that reminds me some things once seen can never be unseen. I felt him before I saw him, a shadow that didn't belong, a weight pressing against the night. It was over a week ago, and I was driving home late from a friend's house, the kind of tired that makes your bones ache and your vision blur at the edges. The road to my house stretched endlessly before me, a narrow ribbon of asphalt flanked by dark fields. My small home on my parents' property came into view, its familiar outline a beacon of safety. The front porch light, set to flicker, on its 7 sound each evening, cast a soft glow over the table I'd decorated for the holidays, and the plastic chair tucked in the corner. But as I slowed down 35 yards away, my heart stopped. Someone was sitting there, staring straight at the road. The figure was thin, almost skeletal, his pale hair catching the faint light like a ghostly halo. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening as a wave of confusion washed over me. Have you ever seen something that shouldn't be there? Something that makes your skin crawl with wrongness? At first, I thought it was my dad. He's been struggling with dementia, and getting to the porch isn't easy for him. The soft dirt around the house makes it a treacherous journey. But as I eased closer, the illusion shattered. This man was younger, his hair darker, his posture too rigid to be my father's. My mind raced trying to piece together what to do about a stranger on my porch at this hour. Sensory overload. The air felt thicker, the hum of my car engine too loud, the glow of the porch light too harsh against the endless dark. I turned into the driveway, my hands trembling as I angled the car. The headlights swept across the porch, illuminating every detail, the table, the decorations, the chair. Pattern interruption. But the chair was empty. The man was gone, as if he'd never been there. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, staring at the vacant spot where he'd been moments ago. Trance loop. He was there. He was there. He was there. My mind chanted, refusing to let go of the image. A part of me wanted to believe it was exhaustion, a trick of the light, a cruel joke my tired brain had played. But deep down, I knew better. I gathered my things, my movements jerky, and bolted inside, my foot catching on the wooden post of the porch cover. Pain shot through my toe, sharp and searing, but I barely noticed. My thoughts consumed by what I'd seen. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, but the lie felt hollow. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table, the memory of the night before gnawing at me. I live on my parents' property, so my mother's house is just a short walk away. Her windows offering a clear view of my porch. I told her everything, my voice unsteady as I recounted the man in the chair. Her face changed, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. She admitted she'd seen shadowy figures on my porch before, lingering in the corners where the light didn't reach. Detailed storytelling. She told me about a night a few weeks ago when I was out, and she'd heard a man's voice at my door, clear as day, speaking words she couldn't quite make out. She'd thought it was one of my brothers or a friend, but when she stepped inside, no one was there. Her words sent a chill down my spine, a confirmation I didn't want. I'm single, and the idea of a man's voice echoing in my empty home made my stomach churn. I tried to move on, convincing myself it was all in my head. I even moved the chair from the corner of the porch, hoping to break whatever spell had settled there. But last night, it happened again. I was coming home late from work, my mind on nothing more than spring rolls and a quiet evening in front of the TV. The road was deserted, the night heavy with silence, and as I pulled into my driveway, I saw him. There he was, sitting in the same chair, staring at the road as if waiting for me. This time, I turned off my headlights before pulling in, determined to see him clearly. He was a thin man with a gaunt face, his grayish-brown hair catching the faint light, his burgundy shirt a stark contrast against the off-white paneling of my house. Anchoring. That burgundy shirt became my anchor, a vivid detail that rooted him in reality, a reality I couldn't deny. I sat in my car, staring at him. For nearly a minute, my heart pounding in my chest. Embedded command. "Don't look away," a voice in my head urged. "See him for what he is." I flicked on the headlights, and just like before, he vanished. But this time I saw him disappear, his form dissolving into the air like smoke. There was nothing behind him, no trick of shadow or reflection to explain it. The off-white paneling of my house stood stark and empty, mocking my disbelief. I had no choice but to accept it. My mother's encounters were real, and so was he. I already knew my house was haunted, but I'd never seen a male spirit before. The thought of him watching me, waiting for me, filled me with a quiet dread that lingers even now. I was already off at college when this happened, leaving my little brother behind in our mom's house, a quaint little place in a quiet neighborhood. He had a habit, one Mom never knew about. He'd sneak out to the driveway in the dead of night, around 3 a.m., to smoke a cigarette. The darkness at that hour felt alive, heavy with secrets, the kind of silence that made you feel like you weren't alone. Across the street lived an older couple, always traveling, their house often left empty. Their backyard was a jungle of towering trees, tangled shrubs, and forgotten structures, a chicken coop sagging with age, and a couple of old sheds, their wood weathered and dark, as if they held stories no one dared to tell. One night, my brother lingered longer than usual, the air cold against his skin, the cigarette's ember the only light in the suffocating dark. Then it came. A scream tore through the stillness, raw and guttural, echoing from the neighbor's backyard. It wasn't just a cry. It was primal, like a man in agony, his voice muffled as if trapped beneath layers of earth. My brother froze, the cigarette trembling between his fingers. The sound wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, a haunting echo that seemed to crawl through the trees, reaching for him. His heart raced, not with concern for whoever might be hurt, but with a terror so deep it felt instinctual, as if the scream itself was a predator. It lingered for a few agonizing moments, then faded into the night, leaving behind a silence even heavier than before. Shaken, he stubbed out his cigarette and hurried inside, the door's lock a fragile barrier against whatever he'd just heard. He tried to push it from his mind to convince himself it was nothing, a dream, a trick of the wind. But the fear clung to him, a shadow he couldn't shake. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night gnawed at him. He found himself back in the driveway at 3 a.m., the same hour, the same suffocating darkness. It happened again. The scream erupted, identical to the first time, a man's voice twisted in pain, distant yet piercing, coming from the same backyard. It was as if time had looped, replaying the horror with cruel precision. My brother's blood ran cold, his body rooted to the spot. The fear wasn't rational. It was primal, a dread that whispered of things beyond the living. The scream faded, but its echo lingered in his mind. a ghostly imprint that followed him back inside. He didn't sleep that night, his thoughts spiraling into the unknown, wondering what lived in that backyard. What could scream like that not once, but twice, at the exact same hour? Some weeks later, the sun was high, and the neighborhood felt alive again, the darkness a distant memory. My brother was outside when the older woman from across the street passed by on her daily walk. She waved, her smile warm, and stopped to chat. Hesitant, he mentioned the screams, his voice low, as speaking them aloud might summon the sound again. Her eyes lit up with recognition, and she let out a soft laugh, not mocking but knowing. "Oh, that," she said, her tone carrying the weight of an old story. She explained that when they'd moved into the house years ago, the children who lived there before had warned them about the backyard shed. "It's haunted," they'd said, their young voices trembling with certainty. She'd never heard the screams herself, but the tale had stuck with her, passed down like a family heirloom. My brother stood there, the daylight doing little to warm the chill that crept up his spine. A haunted shed. The words echoed in his mind, tying the screams to something ancient, something that refused to leave. That story became the closest I've ever come to a ghost tale of my own, though I never heard the screams myself. But knowing what my brother felt, the raw terror that gripped him, I can't help but wonder what lingers in that shed. What pain or memory screams at 3 a.m., night after night. Some things don't rest, even when the living try to forget. I stood on a forgotten trail near Mount Hood, the air so thick with silence it felt like the forest itself was a predator, waiting to swallow me whole. It was October, and I'd come to Owl Hollow seeking refuge from the chaos of my life. A remote, desolate stretch of wilderness near Jordan Creek that barely existed on any map. A place so isolated it seemed to hum with secrets older than the mountains themselves. I needed to escape, to flee the suffocating grind of work, the endless noise of people, the constant pressure that had left my mind frayed and my heart heavy. But what I found in that forest wasn't peace. It was a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. Feel that creeping dread now, the kind that wraps around your chest whispering that you've made a terrible mistake. The trees loomed over me, their gnarled branches twisting into shapes that seemed to shift in the corner of my eye, as if they were alive, watching, waiting for me to notice them. The first few hours of my hike were a balm to my battered soul, a deceptive calm that lulled me into a false sense of security. My boots crunched against the gravel path, the sound a steady rhythm that matched the slow, deliberate beating of my heart. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp, clean scent of pine and damp earth, mingling with the faint sweetness of decaying leaves. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting golden patches that danced across the forest floor, painting the scene in a glow that felt almost magical. Picture it now. A solitary trail winding through towering evergreens, the sunlight breaking through in warm, fleeting bursts, a moment so serene it could be a painting on a postcard. Jordan Creek murmured softly to my left, its gentle babbling a soothing melody that seemed to wash away the tension in my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe, like the weight of the world had lifted, leaving me light and unburdened. I paused to take a sip from my water bottle, the cool liquid sliding down my throat as I closed my eyes, letting the tranquility of the moment seep into my bones. I thought I'd found peace, a sanctuary where I could finally be alone with my thoughts, free from the demands of the world I'd left behind. But the forest had other plans. As the afternoon wore on, a subtle shift began to stir in the air. Change so gradual I barely noticed it at first. It started as a faint prickle on the back of my neck, a nagging sensation that made my skin tingle, like the feeling you get when someone is standing too close behind you, their breath warm against your ear. Have you ever felt that? The unshakable sense that you're being watched, that something unseen is tracking your every move? I glanced around, my eyes darting between the trees, searching for the source of my unease. But there was nothing. Just the endless stretch of forest, silent and still. I told myself it was nothing, just the solitude playing tricks on my mind, the isolation making me jumpy. But the feeling didn't fade. It grew heavier, more oppressive, until it was a physical weight pressing against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. My heart began to beat faster, a steady thump that echoed in my ears, drowning out the sound of the creek. I quickened my pace, my boots kicking up small clouds of dust as I moved, trying to outrun the growing sense of dread that clung to me like a shadow. Around 3 o'clock, I stopped to catch my breath, my chest heaving as I leaned against a tree, the rough bark digging into my palm. I let my gaze drift off the trail, into the dense underbrush that flanked the path, the tangled branches and leaves forming a wall of green and brown. That's when I saw them. A pair of eyes, low to the ground, staring at me through the foliage, not blinking, just watching, their gaze steady and unyielding. They weren't the eyes of a deer. I'd seen plenty of those in my time, and these were different. Wrong in a way that sent a shiver racing down my spine. The shape was off, too round, too large, and the way they caught the light made them glint with an unnatural sheen, like polished obsidian. Feel that icy dread now, the kind that roots you to the spot, your heart pounding as the world tilts into something unfamiliar. There was no sound, not even the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig, just an eerie stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs felt like lead, my body frozen by the weight of that gaze. I forced myself to take a step back, then another, my eyes never leaving those unblinking orbs, until I finally turned and hurried down the trail, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I should have turned back then, should have listened to the primal instinct screaming in my gut, but I didn't. I was a fool, too stubborn to admit I was afraid. An hour later, I rounded a bend in the trail, my mind still reeling from the encounter, when my blood turned to ice. There they were, a man and a woman standing in the middle of the path as if they'd been waiting for me all along. Their presence was jarring, out of place in the solitude of the forest, and their appearance only deepened my unease. Their clothes were wrong, faded and stiff, like they'd walked out of a photograph from a century ago, the fabric dusty and frayed at the edges, the colors muted and washed out. The man wore a high-collared shirt and trousers that looked hand-stitched. The woman in a long dress with a high neckline, her hair pinned up in a style I'd only seen in history books. I opened my mouth to speak, to say hello, to ask if they needed help. But the words died in my throat, caught in a wave of nausea that surged through me. Their faces, oh God, their faces. They turned their heads in unison, their movements unnervingly, synchronized as if they were puppets controlled by the same invisible string, and they smiled at me. But it wasn't a human smile. Their mouths stretched too wide, far beyond what any human jaw could manage, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too stained, like they'd been gnawing on something raw and bloody. And their eyes, those bottomless black pits, seemed to swallow, the light around them, reflecting nothing but an endless void. Imagine staring into an abyss that stares back, an abyss that knows you, that wants you. My stomach churned, a wave of bile rising in my throat as I fought the urge to retch. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. frozen by the sheer wrongness of what I was seeing. They didn't speak, didn't move toward me. They just stood there, their heads still turned, those horrific smiles fixed on me like a predator sizing up its prey. My mind raced, grasping for explanations, for some rational way to make sense of this, but there was none. They weren't human, couldn't be human. Not with those faces, those eyes. And then, as if nothing had happened, they began to walk, their steps slow and deliberate, passing me on the trail. But even as they moved away, their heads remained turned, those black eyes locked on me, those smiles never wavering, until they disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the shadows. I stood there, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I should have fled then, should have run back to my truck and never looked back, but I didn't. I was an idiot, too caught up in my own stubbornness to see the danger I was in. By the time I set up camp that night, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and gray. My hands trembled as I pitched my tent, the fabric slipping through my fingers as I struggled to drive the stakes into the ground. I was a mess, my nerves frayed to the breaking point, my mind replaying that encounter over and over. Their smiles, their eyes, the way they'd moved in perfect unison. I tried to focus on the task at hand, telling myself I was safe, that I'd imagined the worst of it, but the forest had other plans. As darkness fell, the air grew unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that presses against your eardrums, making every sound, or lack thereof, feel like a threat. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The creek's gentle murmur was the only sound, a haunting backdrop to the terror that was slowly creeping into my bones. I built a small fire, the flames crackling weakly as I sat beside it, clutching my pistol, my eyes darting to the shadows that danced at the edge of the firelight. That's when I saw them. It started with one, a faint shape in the trees barely visible in the dim glow of the fire. Its outline humanoid but wrong, too tall, too thin. Then another appeared, peeking from behind a rock, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then more, their forms emerging from the darkness like nightmares given flesh. 17, maybe 18 of them, their numbers growing with each passing second. They were everywhere. Crouching in the branches above, peering from behind boulders, half hidden in the tall grass that surrounded my camp, their twisted smiles glowing faintly in the firelight, those black eyes glinting with a hunger that made my blood run cold. Feel that terror now, the kind that makes your skin crawl, your breath shallow, as you realize you're surrounded by something that shouldn't exist. They didn't move closer, didn't make a sound. They just watched, their unblinking gazes boring into me, their presence a suffocating weight that pressed against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. My hands tightened around the pistol, my knuckles white, my mind screaming as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. They weren't human, couldn't be human, not with those smiles, those eyes, those numbers. They were something else. Something ancient, something that had been waiting in Owl Hollow for someone foolish enough to stumble into their domain. I sat there for what felt like hours. Though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes, my body frozen, my mind racing with a primal fear I'd never known before. I felt like prey, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a pack of wolves, waiting for the moment they'd strike. Their smiles never wavered, their eyes never blinked, and the silence around us was deafening, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire and the pounding of my own heart. I don't know what broke the spell, what finally snapped me out of that paralyzing terror, but something inside me shifted. A spark of survival instinct, a desperate need to escape. I stood, my hands shaking as I raised the pistol and fired 2 shots into the air, the sound shattering the silence like a thunderclap. The echoes reverberated through the trees, sharp and jarring, a desperate plea for the world to return to normal. But they didn't flinch, not a single one. That was when I knew I had to run. I grabbed my pack, my legs moving before my mind could catch up, and I ran as if my life depended on it, because I believe it did. The forest blurred around me as I fled, branches clawing at my face, their sharp tips drawing thin lines of blood across my cheeks. The ground was uneven beneath my feet, roots and rocks threatening to trip me with every step. But I didn't stop, didn't dare look back. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning as I pushed myself harder, faster, the sound of my own heartbeat drowning out everything else. I could feel them behind me, their presence a cold, heavy weight that pressed against my back, urging me to keep going, to escape before it was too late. I don't remember reaching my truck, don't remember the drive home. I only remember slamming the door behind me, collapsing onto the floor of my house, the pistol still clutched in my hand, my body trembling with the aftershocks of fear. I sat there in the darkness for hours, my mind replaying every moment, every detail, their smiles, their eyes, the way they'd watched me, unblinking, unyielding, as if they were waiting for something I couldn't give. I haven't told anyone, until now, because I know how it sounds. I barely believe it myself when I replay it in my mind. The memory's so vivid it feels like a dream, a nightmare I can't wake from. But I know what I saw, what I felt, and I know it was real. Those things in Owl Hollow weren't human. They were something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting in the shadows of that forest for centuries, maybe longer. They wanted something from me, something I'll never understand, and I'm only alive because I ran when I did. If you ever find yourself near Owl Hollow, near Mount Hood, turn around. Don't look back, don't stop, just go. Some places are better left forgotten, left to the shadows that haunt them, the smiling shadows that watch from the darkness, waiting for their next prey. Step into a realm where the air hums with the echoes of forgotten ages, where every tree seems to guard a secret too ancient for the modern world to fathom. I was hiking through a forest in England, my boots sinking into the soft, mossy earth. With each step, the faint scent of damp wood and wildflowers filling my lungs. I knew I was trespassing, my presence an intrusion on this private land. But the knowledge of a public footpath nearby, a winding trail I intended to return to eventually, kept my unease at bay. I let curiosity lead me deeper, the forest's quiet beauty drawing me in like a siren's call, its shadows whispering promises of discovery. As I ventured further, I stumbled upon a section of the forest that felt like a portal to another time. The trees here were massive, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like the arms of ancient giants, their bark encrusted with lichen that glowed faintly in the dim light filtering through the canopy, their roots twisted into the earth, thick and sprawling, as if they'd been there since the dawn of creation, holding the ground together with an unspoken authority. Before me lay a carpet of bluebells, their delicate blooms shimmering with a soft, ethereal glow. Stretching out as far as my eyes could see, a sea of violet that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Scattered among them were large stones, their surfaces cloaked in a thick layer of moss, their placement too precise, too deliberate to be natural. They stood like silent sentinels, marking a boundary I couldn't see but could feel in the pit of my stomach, as if I'd crossed into a sacred space, a realm where time itself had paused. The air was heavy with an unspoken reverence, a weight that pressed against my chest, making each breath feel like a privilege I hadn't earned. It was as if I'd stepped back through the centuries, or slipped into another world entirely, one where the rules of reality no longer applied, where forest itself was alive with memories too vast, too profound, for a mere mortal to comprehend. Have you ever stood in a place so ancient, so untouched, that it feels like the earth itself is whispering tales of a time before humanity, its voice a warning you can't quite hear? I lingered there, captivated, my senses overwhelmed by the timeless beauty, unaware of the forces I'd just awakened. I pressed on, my footsteps soft against the forest floor, each step a quiet intrusion into the stillness that enveloped me. The bluebells swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel, their delicate petals catching the faint light that pierced the canopy, their fragrance a subtle whisper of spring amidst the ancient decay of the forest. The massive trees loomed overhead, their lichen-covered bark glowing faintly in the dimness, their branches weaving a tapestry of shadows that danced across the ground. I was lost in the beauty of it all, my senses drinking in the ethereal scene, my mind wandering to tales of old, stories of druids and ancient rites, of sacred groves where the veil between worlds was thin. But then, a sound shattered the stillness, a sound so jarring, so out of place that it felt like a violation of the forest's sanctity. It was the loud, unmistakable noise of a door slamming shut behind me, its echo reverberating through the trees, bouncing off the ancient stones and fading into the distance like a ghostly wail. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, my breath catching as I scanned the forest for the source of the sound. But there was nothing. No door, no structure, just the endless expanse of trees, their gnarled forms staring back at me, the bluebells stretching out like a sea of violet, and the mossy stones standing silent, their surfaces unyielding. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that the forest's eerie quiet had played a trick on my nerves, amplifying the rustle of leaves into something more sinister. I turned back, forcing my feet to move, determined to continue my journey, to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest like a stone. But then I heard it. A voice, clear as day, deep and commanding, cutting through the air like a blade, forged in fire. "Leave here," it said, its tone a chilling decree that seemed to resonate from every direction and none at all, as if the forest itself had given voice to its ancient will. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, a warning that wrapped around me like a shroud, its echo lingering in the stillness long after the voice had faded. Can you imagine hearing a command in a place where no one should be? Its words, a decree that chills you to your core, as if the very earth has spoken your judgment. I froze, my body rooted to the spot as if the forest itself had bound me to the earth, my eyes darting frantically through the shadowed trees, searching for the source of that voice. But there was no one, no figure, no shadow, nothing but the endless sea of bluebells stretching out before me, their delicate blooms swaying in a breeze that seemed to carry whispers I couldn't decipher. The ancient stones stood as silent witnesses, their mossy surfaces gleaming faintly in the dim light, their presence a reminder of the sacred ground I'd so carelessly trespassed upon. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in my ears, drowning out the forest's eerie quiet. A wave of dread washed over me, heavy and suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with an unseen menace, pressing against my lungs until each breath felt like a struggle. It was as if I'd intruded on something sacred, something forbidden, a realm where mortals were not meant to tread, and the forest knew it, knew I didn't belong, knew I'd crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The beauty that had once captivated me now felt tainted, warped by an invisible presence that lurked just beyond my sight. its gaze a tangible weight on my shoulders. The forest felt different now, its atmosphere shifting, as if the trees themselves were closing, in their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, the shadows deepening into pools of inky black that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The bluebells, once a symbol of spring's gentle touch, now glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, their delicate blooms casting a ghostly shimmer that illuminated the ground in a way that felt wrong, otherworldly. The stones appeared to shift, their mossy surfaces taking on a life of their own, their shapes twisting in the corner of my eye, as if they were watching me, their ancient gaze unyielding, judging me for my intrusion. Then the voice came again, louder this time, more insistent, its command a thunderous echo that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. "Leave here." The words reverberated through the forest, bouncing off the trees, the stones, the bluebells, each echo a reminder of my transgression, a demand that I could no longer ignore. What would you feel, knowing you've trespassed into a realm that rejects you? Its ancient guardians whispering threats that echo through your very soul, their voices a judgment you can't escape. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, a primal urge to flee that overpowered every rational thought, drowning out the whispers of caution that had kept me grounded. I broke into a run, my breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Each exhale a visible puff of mist in the frigid air, my legs burning with the effort as I pushed them to their limits. The forest seemed to twist and writhe around me, its ancient beauty morphing into something sinister, something alive with a malevolence I couldn't comprehend. The bluebells' glow intensified, their light no longer soft and ethereal but harsh, unnatural, casting strange, flickering shadows that danced like specters at the edge of my vision, their shapes twisting into forms that were both familiar and terrifyingly alien. The massive trees loomed closer, their lichen-covered branches stretching out like skeletal hands, their roots rising from the earth as if to trip me, to ensnare me, to keep me trapped in this sacred grove I'd so foolishly invaded. The stones, once silent sentinels, now loomed larger, their shapes more menacing, their mossy surfaces gleaming with an otherworldly light that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. They appeared to shift, to move, as if they were closing in around me, herding me toward an unseen fate, their ancient presence a reminder of the power I'd disturbed, the sanctity I'd violated with my careless trespassing. I stumbled over, roots, my boots slipping on the mossy ground, the forest floor slick with frost and decay, each misstep threatening to send me sprawling into the underbrush. But I didn't dare stop, didn't dare look back, driven by the voice's command and the overwhelming sense that I was being watched, hunted, by something ancient and unforgiving, something that knew I didn't belong here, something that wanted me gone, or worse. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the forest itself was exhaling its displeasure, its breath a chilling whisper that brushed against my skin, raising goosebumps in its wake. My lungs burned, my chest tight with the effort of running, but the fear that gripped me was stronger, a primal terror that pushed me forward, that refused to let me falter. I ran until I finally burst onto the public footpath, the familiar trail a lifeline in the chaos, its worn dirt a stark contrast to the otherworldly grove I'd just escaped. But I didn't stop there. I kept running, my legs trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, until the forest was far behind me, its ancient trees no longer visible in the fading light of the day, their gnarled forms swallowed by the horizon. Even now, miles away, safe in the familiarity of the world I know, I can't shake the feeling that something in that forest saw me, truly saw me, its gaze piercing through the layers of my being to mark me as an intruder, an outsider who dared to tread where I wasn't welcome. The memory of that voice, deep and commanding, echoes in my mind, its words a haunting refrain that I can't silence. Leave here. The bluebell's eerie glow, the shifting stones, the oppressive weight of the forest's ancient presence, they linger in my thoughts. A constant reminder of the boundary I crossed, the sacred space I violated. I fear that whatever dwells in that grove, whatever spoke to me with such authority, knows who I am, knows my name, my face, my very essence. That knowledge haunts me, a shadow that follows me long after I've left the forest behind. A whisper, in the dark that I can't escape, a presence that watches me still, waiting for the moment I might return. Have you ever felt the lingering gaze of something otherworldly, its knowledge of you a burden you can't shed, a shadow that follows you long after you've fled its domain, its whispers a reminder of the sacred ground you dared to disturb? We thought the night at Penderosa Reservoir would be a simple escape, but something was waiting in the dark, and it had no face. My family and I had set up camp by the shimmering waters of Penderosa Reservoir in California, a place where the stars seemed to touch the earth. It was a perfect getaway, until the night took a turn into terror. My brother and I, eager for a late-night adventure, decided to go fishing. We grabbed our rods and headed down a narrow trail, a 5-minute walk from our campsite, toward a spot near an old cabin that had burned down years ago. The ruins were a haunting sight, charred beams jutting out like broken bones, surrounded by overgrown weeds and scattered debris. The air felt heavy, the kind of stillness that makes your skin prickle, as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, an unseen gaze boring into us from the tangled overgrowth. The trail was shrouded in darkness, the moonlight barely piercing through the dense canopy above. Every step echoed with the crunch of gravel and leaves, a sound that seemed too loud in the oppressive quiet. The area around the cabin was a perfect hiding spot for anyone, or anything, lurking in the shadows, and the thought sent a shiver down my spine. As we reached the fishing spot, a cold dread settled in my chest, a primal instinct screaming that something was wrong. I turned to my brother, my voice barely above a whisper, and told him I couldn't stay. The feeling of being watched was too intense, too real, and I begged him to walk me back to the campsite. He agreed, his face unreadable in the dim light, and I hurried back to the safety of our tent, leaving him to return alone. My brother, always braver, or perhaps more reckless than me, went back to the same spot, determined to catch a fish, despite the eerie atmosphere that had driven me away. He settled on a jagged rock by the water's edge, casting his line into the inky blackness of the reservoir. The night was silent, save for the gentle lapping of the water, but then a rustling in the bushes behind him broke the stillness, a sound that seemed to creep closer with every heartbeat. He called out, his voice firm, telling whatever it was to leave, and for a moment the rustling stopped. But when he turned back to his line, the sound returned, closer now, more deliberate, as if something was stalking him through the undergrowth. My brother shifted to the other side of the fishing spot, hoping to escape the unseen presence. But the rustling followed, mirroring his every move. The bushes parted slightly, revealing nothing but darkness, yet the sense of being hunted grew, stronger. A predator's gaze he couldn't see but could feel in his bones. He tried to focus on his fishing, his hands trembling as he reeled in his line. But the air around him felt charged, heavy with an unspoken threat. Just as he pulled a fish from the water, its scales glinting in the moonlight, he looked up the steep hill leading to the trail, and what he saw froze the blood in his veins. There, squatting in the bushes, was a creature, something that defied all reason. It had no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth expanse of flesh where features should have been. Only its ears and a long, sinewy neck were visible, stark against the shadows, its form a grotesque mockery of anything human. My brother's breath caught, his mind reeling as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. The creature didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was a scream in itself, a silent promise of terror. He shouted at it, his voice cracking with fear, demanding it leave him alone, and in that moment he bolted, running up the hill to call us for help. The fish slipped from his hands, forgotten, as the faceless thing watched him flee, its eyeless gaze burning into his back. We rushed to him, our footsteps pounding against the trail, our hearts racing with a fear we couldn't yet name. When we reached him, he was pale, his eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen in him before. He tried to stay calm, not wanting to scare us, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. It wasn't until the next morning, under the harsh light of day, that he told us what he'd seen. The faceless creature, its unnatural stillness, the way it had watched him without eyes. I can't stop seeing it in my mind, that blank expanse where a face should be, a nightmare that refuses to fade. The Penderosa Reservoir, once a place of peace, is now a memory tainted by something beyond understanding, a shadow that lingers in the corners of our thoughts,